A new world order is emerging. In a world of shifting dynamics and global influence, 5 nations stand tall. United by their shared vision of progress and prosperity, the BRICS bloc comprises the extraordinary amalgamation of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These economic powerhouses represent more than 40% of the world's population and are now looking to become engines of growth, harnessing the aspirations and ingenuity of their people and the global South. The BRICS nations recently concluded a meeting of foreign ministers of member nations, and along with them were guest countries, many of whom have shown interest in joining BRICS: Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Cuba, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Comoros, Gabon, Kazakhstan, Egypt, Argentina, Bangladesh, Guinea-Bissau, and Indonesia are some of the countries that have expressed interest to become members of BRICS. The focus of the Cape Town meetings was expansion and cooperation to effectively rival the current world economic order. As Russia's foreign minister puts it, the unipolar system that used to create privileges for a small group of countries by way of imposing on all others unspecified rules and standards that stem from their selfish interests and ignore the fundamental principles of international law is on track to become a thing of the past. End of quote. Together, BRICS is reshaping the global order, championing multilateralism and driving sustainable development that leaves no one behind. Today we take a keen look at the global group BRICS and what it is building. This is The Square, and I am Keminni Amanor. You're most welcome. Joining us today are Ambassador at Large, Asia and BRICS, Professor Anil Suklut. He's joining us from Pretoria, South Africa. We also have Anthony van Nieuwkerk, who is lecturer at Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, UNISA, also joining us from Pretoria, South Africa. Gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square. And Anthony, absolutely. Anthony, I want to say that, Prof, on the other hand, needs to catch a flight, so I'm going to stay on Prof for just a little bit, and then you and I will pick apart what he tells us about BRICS. Prof, let's talk quickly about BRICS. BRICS has made it clear that it is willing and perhaps maybe ready to provide a better alternative to the current Western-led world order. What exactly is the BRICS proposal to the rest of the world?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I don't think BRICS came together to specifically oppose any system that's in place, but to reform and transform the existing geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geofinancial architecture. I think this has been the aim of BRICS since coming together in summit format 15 years ago, championing to have a more equitable, inclusive, fair, and just world order. And if you look at all of BRICS summit declarations, these are the issues that have constantly been echoed, that the current multilateral system has been rendered paralyzed by the actions of some of our friends on the global stage, that the multilateral system is in dire need of reform. This was echoed most recently by UN Secretary General Guterres himself at the recent G7 summit in Hiroshima, where he specifically stated that the UNSC and the Bretton Woods institutions are outdated, unfair, and irrelevant today. And I think this coming from the Secretary General echoes the frustration that we in the Global South have, that there is no desire to transform and reform our existing global governance architecture to make it more inclusive and representative. 85% of the global community, the Global South as we refer to it, is still on the margins of major decision-making. In this day and age, why should we still have the World Bank and the IMF controlled by either the USA or the Europeans? if these are supposed to be financial institutions working for the global society at large. So BRICS is there to champion the cause in the first instance of the 5 countries that would like to see a more equitable and inclusive global architecture. And increasingly, the global south is identifying with BRICS the fact that close to 30 countries have written formally or informally to become members of BRICS, demonstrate that there is a great deal of confidence in what BRICS stand for and what we have been trying to achieve in terms of reorientating the global architecture.
What would you say that the bloc is at the moment in that reorientation process?
Well, I think you are seeing some major issues being addressed. The fact that BRICS developed its own financial institution, the new development bank, that has established itself firmly as a sound financial institution with AA+, AA+ ratings from your major rating agencies. The fact that it's been there to assist BRIC countries in terms of infrastructure and sustainable development projects. Also that they have taken a decision that in the new 5-year strategic plan, at least 30% of lending will be in local currencies. We have signed an agreement between BRICS countries to trade amongst our banks to trade in local currencies. And I think you are seeing an increasing shift where countries want to have financial independence and financial sovereignty in terms of the currencies they trade in, the currency they borrow in. And therefore you are seeing a major development in terms of countries moving towards trading in their own currency. India has signed over 20 agreements, not just amongst BRICS countries, but from the global south, and they continue. Just this past week, Malaysia has signed an agreement with India to trade in the local currency. So there's a move from countries in the global south, not to be pegged, as President Lula recently said, when he was on a state visit to China last month. He raised the question, why should we all just be pegged to the US dollar? Why don't we have the freedom to trade in our own currencies?
What would you say is the mechanism for the bloc? You know, what would you say that are the mechanisms that the bloc is employing to ensure that it is presenting itself as an alternative to countries in the global south, especially when we know that many of these countries are already neck deep in the current order of things?
Well, we're not presenting ourselves as an alternative to the global north or any other entity. What we are presenting ourselves is an alternative to the current order that is unjust, unequal, and continues to ignore the voice of the global south. As Africa, we see this. I mean, it's over 20 years since the UN working group on UNSC reform has been meeting, but there's no movement, there's no appetite to change the global governance system. And I think that's why BRICS is championing that in the evolving multipolar world that we'd like to see, a multipolar world, an inclusive world, a multicultural, multi-civilizational world, that the global south is very much part of this evolving architecture, that we are not on the margins, that decisions are not taken on our behalf. And this is what we are saying as BRICS. We are postulating an alternative that is inclusive, equitable, and where no one is left behind.
Very well. I'll come back to the bit on, countries that are neck deep in the global order. But let's focus on membership now. As it stands, there are just the core members: Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. But we also know, and as you have confirmed, about up to 30 countries are already showing interest in the bloc. Has BRICS already determined the modalities and requirement for membership yet?
We are quite advanced in that. It's something that was assigned to us as Sherpas during the last summit in June last year under China's chairship. We have been meeting as Sherpas and sous-Sherpas to unpack the issues pertaining to paragraph 73 of the Beijing Declaration that specifically calls on us to look at working out guiding principles, standards, criteria, and procedure for expansion. At the recent foreign ministers meeting held in Cape Town last week, all of the ministers were unanimous that BRICS must expand, and they have asked the Sherpas to finalize their report by middle July latest, when foreign ministers again will meet virtually to consider the recommendations in this regard of the Sherpas and to make recommendations to our leaders at the summit when they meet in August. So this is quite advanced, and I'm sure that by the time of the summit, our foreign ministers would be able to make firm recommendations in terms of expansion when we go to the summit.
Well, so we can say there is no official or adopted document in this regard yet.
No, that will be finalized by our ministers when they meet in mid-July.
I see. Now, let's talk about the significance of adding on to the numbers. What would it do for BRICS?
Well, I think expansion is not an easy process. I mean, if you look at all multilateral fora that we have globally, including regional bodies, that expansion is something that must be carefully considered. And that's why they have asked us to work out criteria, standards, and rules of procedure in terms of expansion, because BRICS, the five of us, have been together for the past 15 years, and we have found working mechanism that makes it possible for us to cooperate, despite our differences in a number of areas. But the majority of the areas, there's convergence in this cooperation, and that's why BRICS has been able to continue expanding its areas of cooperation and meaningfully impact on the lives of our people. So, of course, there are a number of key countries from the global south that have been very keen to become part of the BRICS family. And I think all of this will be considered very carefully by our ministers after we as Sherpas have finalized the terms of reference document, if I can refer to it as such, with some recommendations to the ministers.
Indeed.
But I believe, I mean, BRICS as it is, you would have seen that in terms of PPP, GDP, BRICS has overtaken the G7. We account for 40% of the global population, 40% of global land mass, 25% of global GDP, 20% of manufacturing. And it's expected that we will outperform growth in terms of the G7. The World Bank, IMF at the recent spring meetings pointed out that despite the depressed economic environment, the major engines of growth will come from India and China this year, accounting for the major part of growth in the global economy. And I think it again shows the resilience of BRICS countries in terms of the growth. Some of us, of course, have challenges that we are addressing, but I think being together in this configuration, it benefits all of us.
Well, I'm going to jump us right ahead in the conversation and look at the joint statement released after the the Cape Town meetings. There's a lot of emphasis on unilateral and coercive measures that stifle growth of developing countries in this joint statement. What is BRICS referring to, and what alternative are you offering on that?
Well, we have a UN system. We have the UNSC, that is the body that should be responsible for sanctioning countries if they violate the purposes and principles of the Charter, international law, and so forth. South Africa as a country, and I believe all BRICS countries, we are not in favor of unilateral sanctions, of coercive measures that is being used by some major hegemons to put pressure on countries that you either fall in line with our way of thinking and acting, or else you will be punished. And this is something that we have been resisting. We have stated that as countries, there should be respect for our sovereignty, and our decisions in terms of global affairs should also be respected. We shouldn't be pressurized by the major powers to take a certain line of action.
On financial systems, BRICS is looking to change the world trade systems by making it fair and transparent without leaving any country behind. My question is, what's the plan, especially when there is a lot of dependency still on the US dollar?
The US dollar is the major currency. The euro is the major currency. If you look at the basket of currencies, today, these are all major currencies, and I'm sure they will continue to be major currencies. If you look back 20 years ago, the yuan was not part of the major currencies in the special drawing rights. But it is today a weighty currency, and so are other currencies emerging that will become even as equally weighty or even more. I mean, Jim O'Neill, who coined the term BRIC, just 3 days ago writing, he stated that it's a matter of fact that the Chinese economy at some stage or the other, whether in the next decade or 2 decades, will overtake the US economy and become the largest economy. India has moved up within a matter of 10 years from 10th largest economy to 5th largest economy, or even overtaking its former colonial power, today a bigger economy than the UK. Now this is, of course, these are major countries with major populations, 1.4 billion each. And obviously they have major markets and their economies are growing at a rapid rate. So it's natural that they will move up the chain in terms of being major economies in the world. And I think this is what we are saying. The world order of 50 years ago is vastly different from the world order today. Your top 7 economies are no more the G7 countries. There are other players in the top 7.
So then, will the trading be in the yuan, or it would be in the currency of member states, or perhaps BRICS will be introducing a common currency, a trading currency for its members?
We are not talking of a common BRICS currency at the moment. There is much speculation in the media about this. What we are saying, we need to start trading in our own currencies, recognizing our own currencies, payment systems in our own currencies, and borrowing in our own currencies. We should not be forced to borrow in a particular currency and pay back in that currency. And given the fluctuation of our currencies against the major currencies, we are always the one that feels the pain in this regard. So having the possibility, not possibility, the reality now, to trade and interact in our local currencies, I think that's a plus factor for all of us.
On financial systems still, a new development bank has been spoken about that is an inadequately resourced International Monetary Fund has also been spoken about. In what ways would you say that the BRICS versions of these institutions will be from what we know now?
Well, look, the NDB is a relatively young multilateral development bank. But in the short period that it's been there, they just had the Board of Governors meeting last week with the new president of the bank, former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff. And at her meeting, she made it very clear that the bank will also diversify its borrowing away from just Western markets and look at the Middle Eastern and Asian markets to raise capital on the international market to make us more diversified in terms of our borrowing, as well as in terms of bringing in new members. As you know, we've brought in 4 new members, but there's a list of 20 countries that have asked to become members of the NDB. So in the second round, we will also continue expanding the NDB, given the vast interest from the countries of the Global South to become full members of the NDB as well.
I see. And this NDB, I mean, we've spoken about currencies, but the NDB, which is doing some wonderful work, $3.28 billion already, 96 projects, it still transacts in the dollars. When is that changing?
Well, it's ongoing. As I said, it's a young bank. It's a young bank, and it's finding its feet. And in this very difficult global environment, I mean, the unilateral sanctions placed on Russia also impacted on the bank. The bank had to stop new lending to Russia as of last year. But these are some of the challenges the new president is addressing, including, as I said, diversifying our borrowing so that we do not become held hostage to unilateral sanctions by the whims and fancies of certain countries. The bank wants to be independent and not dependent on 1 or 2 entities in terms of its borrowing. Therefore, you will see an increased financial injection from countries of the Middle East that are very keen to pump capital into the NDB and several other Asian countries.
Indeed. We can't wait to see what currency pops up there on the website in the future. But on conflicts, the ministers condemned unrest in the MENA region, in Sudan, and even called out the world leaders for their double standards in tackling terrorism. However, there was not a single word on Russia-Ukraine war. Why?
There was a robust discussion on that. The position of BRICS is that we should find a solution to the conflict through diplomatic means with the UN at the center. That has been the position of BRICS in terms of the conflict. We continue to address it. Nearly all of the BRICS leaders are involved in initiatives at ending the conflict. None of the BRICS countries or countries of the global south are pumping weapons and armament into the Ukraine conflict. But yet, we have been accused, South Africa included, that we have been shipping armament to Russia through a naval vessel that called here. But they should look at themselves in terms of what they are doing to continue inflaming this war. There is no global south country pumping weapons into the Ukraine. There is only countries of the global north that's keeping this conflict alive. BRICS is very clear. President Lula has put forward proposals. President Xi has put forward proposals, the 12 peace plan. President Ramaphosa and in total 6 African leaders are going to Ukraine and Russia shortly. So we are about peace and we're not about conflict.
Indeed, I just want to, quickly before we end our conversation, because you have to go and I have Anthony to speak to as well. Next year, chairship of BRICS goes to Russia. How do you think that will play out if the war in Ukraine persists?
Well, BRICS has been able to continue functioning optimally. As of last year, despite the Russia-Ukraine conflict, China hosted close to 200 meetings. All of our meetings were held on schedule, albeit virtual last year because of COVID in China and the lockup that you had there. This year, all of our meetings, by and large, are in person. South Africa will host close to 200 meetings by the end of our chairship in December. We have been hosting all of our meetings, highly successful. So we are on track to host a successful summit. And I'm quite certain our chairship would also deliver on all of the areas of cooperation. Likewise, we expect the cooperation to continue next year. The rest of the world doesn't stand still when you have conflict in one part of the world. They continue to function. But while we must address the situation, life goes on and we must continue to cooperate and we must continue to address our challenges and also take advantage of the opportunities that we have through partnerships.
Professor Sukulal, I'm afraid this is all the time we have for such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much. Hopefully you're not late for your flight.
Thank you so much.